I pushed through the heavy glass doors of Brennan and Associates law firm, my military combat boots echoing against the polished marble floor. The crisp fabric of my camouflage uniform still carried the scent of the training field, where I had spent the last 18 hours perfecting trauma surgery techniques. My hands trembled slightly as I approached the mahogany reception desk, not from exhaustion, but from the words that kept replaying in my mind like a broken record. My father's voice, cold and distant, cutting through me like a surgical blade. "From now on, you are no longer my daughter." The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, looked up from her computer screen and smiled warmly until her eyes traveled down to my name tag. Her expression shifted immediately, the color draining from her cheeks, as if she had seen a ghost walking through her perfectly organized office space. The phone call that destroyed my world had come exactly 4 hours and 37 minutes ago, just as I finished demonstrating advanced battlefield triage procedures to a group of junior medics. I remember checking my watch because I was excited to share the news with Dad that I had finally completed my 18-month military medical training program. After years of studying sleepless nights and grueling practical exams, I had earned my certification as a trauma nurse specializing in emergency battlefield medicine. Dad had always been my biggest supporter, especially after Mom passed away when I was 16. He understood the demands of military life better than anyone, having served 2 tours in Vietnam before building his pharmaceutical business from the ground up. I had stepped outside the medical facility, breathing in the cool October air as I dialed his number. The phone rang 3 times before he answered, and immediately I knew something was terribly wrong. His voice lacked the usual warmth, the pride that always filled his tone when we spoke about my military career. Instead, he sounded like a stranger, mechanical and detached. "Dad, I did it. I passed everything. The trauma certification, the advanced surgical techniques, even the psychological evaluation. I'm officially qualified to serve in combat zones as a field medic." Silence stretched between us for what felt like an eternity. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in his study, the same clock that had marked every important moment of my childhood. Finally, he spoke, and his words hit me like shrapnel. "Naomi, I know what you have been doing. I know about the investigation, the documents, everything. From now on, you are no longer my daughter." My legs nearly gave out beneath me. "What are you talking about? What investigation, Dad? I do not understand." "Do not pretend with me. I found the classified files in your apartment when I stopped by last week to leave your birthday present. Federal documents, financial records, reports with your signature on them. You have been working against your own family, against everything I built to honor your mother's memory." The birthday present. I had completely forgotten that Dad had a spare key to my apartment. Last Tuesday was my 28th birthday, and he must have let himself in while I was at the base. But the documents he mentioned made no sense. I kept all my military paperwork properly secured, and I certainly was not involved in any investigation of his company. "Dad, please listen to me. I think there has been some kind of mistake. I would never work against you or Mom's memory. You know how much I love and respect what you built. The pharmaceutical company has helped so many people, saved so many lives." "Enough lies, Naomi. Go see Harold Brennan, my attorney. He has special instructions regarding my will. Consider this conversation the last time we will ever speak." The line went dead, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot with my phone pressed against my ear, hoping desperately that I had misunderstood that this was some kind of nightmare brought on by exhaustion and stress. But the dial tone confirmed the reality. My father, the man who had raised me single-handedly after Mom's tragic car accident, who had attended every graduation ceremony and promotion ceremony, who had told me just 3 weeks ago how proud he was of the woman I had become, had just disowned me. I spent the next 3 hours driving to his lawyer's office, my mind racing through every possible explanation. Maybe someone was blackmailing him, forcing him to say those terrible things. Maybe he was having some kind of breakdown, struggling with grief that he had never properly processed after losing Mom. Or maybe And this thought terrified me more than any combat scenario. There really were documents that I did not remember, classified materials that somehow connected me to an investigation I knew nothing about. As I parked outside the law firm, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My brown hair was pulled back in regulation style, and my green eyes, the same shade as Mom's, looked hollow with confusion and heartbreak. I straightened my uniform jacket, took a deep breath, and walked toward what I hoped would be answers, but feared might be the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about my family. The twist that awaited me inside would shatter my understanding of not just the present, but the entire foundation of my past. Harold Brennan was not just my father's attorney. He was the man who had been secretly investigating my father's pharmaceutical company for insurance fraud, and he had discovered that I unknowingly had been gathering evidence for a federal task force targeting military contract corruption. My father's discovery of those documents had not been an accident. It had been the trigger for a conspiracy that reached back 16 years to the night my mother died. Harold Brennan's office felt like a museum dedicated to legal intimidation. Dark wood paneling covered the walls, interrupted only by diplomas and certificates that spoke of decades in corporate law. The man himself appeared to be in his late 60s, with thinning gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses that magnified his nervous brown eyes. When I introduced myself as Robert's daughter, he literally began shaking his hands, trembling so violently that he knocked over a coffee mug, sending dark liquid spreading across legal documents scattered on his desk. Miss Naomi, he stammered quickly, grabbing tissues to soak up the coffee. Yes, your father said you would be coming. Please sit down. Lock the door behind you. The request to lock the door sent chills down my spine. In all my military training, I had learned to recognize when someone was operating under extreme fear. Harold was not just nervous about delivering bad news. He was terrified for his life. Mr. Brennan, what is going on? My father called me 4 hours ago and disowned me. He mentioned something about classified documents and an investigation. I have no idea what he was talking about. Harold walked to his window, peering through the blinds at the street below before returning to his desk. He pulled out a thick legal folder and opened it with the careful precision of someone handling explosive materials. Your father's will, he began, his voice barely above a whisper, originally designated you as the sole beneficiary of his entire estate. Brennan Mitchell Pharmaceuticals, his personal assets, real estate holdings, investment portfolios. The total value is approximately $47 million. I felt the blood drain from my face. $47 million. I knew Dad's company was successful, but I had never imagined that level of wealth. We lived comfortably, but Dad had always been modest about money, teaching me to value hard work and service over material possessions. However, Harold continued, his hands still trembling as he turned pages. 1 week ago, your father executed a new will. This document donates his entire fortune to the Veterans Medical Relief Foundation, leaving you with only personal items of sentimental value. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound I had ever experienced. Not only had Dad disowned me, but he had systematically removed me from his life in every legal way possible. Yet something in Harold's manner suggested there was more to this story. Mr. Brennan, you are clearly frightened about something beyond delivering bad news about an inheritance. What are you not telling me? Harold stood up abruptly and walked to a large safe hidden behind a painting of the American flag. As he worked the combination, his shoulders shook with what I realized were suppressed sobs. Naomi, I need you to understand something before I show you what is in this safe. Your father believes you have been working with federal investigators to expose his company for insurance fraud. He found classified documents in your apartment that prove the military has been investigating Brennan Mitchell Pharmaceuticals for systematically overcharging government hospitals by 300% for basic medical supplies. My mind reeled. 300% overcharging meant that a simple IV bag that should cost $20 was being billed to military hospitals for $60. Multiply that across thousands of medical facilities and millions of patients, and the fraud would amount to hundreds of millions of dollars stolen from taxpayer funds meant to care for wounded veterans. But Mr. Brennan, I work as a trauma nurse. I am not involved in any fraud investigation. I would never do anything to hurt veterans or compromise medical care. Harold opened the safe and pulled out several manila folders. That is exactly what I told your father, but he would not listen. The truth is, Naomi, you actually do work for a military medical fraud investigation unit, but you do not know it. Your assignment to gather intelligence on pharmaceutical pricing irregularities was classified as a routine nursing evaluation project. You have been collecting evidence for months without realizing you were part of a federal task force. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All those reports I had filed about supply costs, medication, pricing discrepancies, and billing irregularities that I noticed during my rotations at various military hospitals. I had assumed I was helping improve efficiency and reduce waste. Instead, I had been building a case against my own father's company. There is something else, Harold said, his voice breaking completely. I have been stealing from Brennan Mitchell Pharmaceuticals for 12 years, embezzling money through fake charity organizations. Your father discovered my theft the same day he found your investigation documents. He threatened to expose me unless I helped him frame you as the mastermind behind both the federal investigation and the embezzlement. I stared at this man who had been part of my life since childhood, who had handled our family's legal matters, who had comforted me at my mother's funeral. The scope of betrayal was becoming too vast to comprehend. Mr. Brennan, you are telling me that my father's company has been defrauding the government, that you have been stealing from the company, and that I have unknowingly been gathering evidence for a federal investigation. But none of this explains why you are so frightened or why you asked me to lock the door. Harold's face crumpled as he opened the final folder. Inside were photographs, documents, and what appeared to be a handwritten letter in a woman's elegant script. Because Naomi, your mother, did not die in a car accident 16 years ago. Sarah was murdered because she discovered the same pharmaceutical fraud you have been investigating. And the people who killed her are planning to kill both of us today. The words hit me like artillery fire, destroying every foundation of truth I had built my life upon. My mother, who I remembered as a gentle woman dedicated to helping others, had died under suspicious circumstances that had been covered up for 16 years. The grief I had carried, the hero worship I had developed for her memory, the inspiration that had driven me to military service, all of it was based on lies constructed by the very man who had raised me. Harold's confession poured out of him like water from a burst dam, 16 years of guilt and terror, finally finding release. He moved around his office like a caged animal, constantly checking the windows and door, as if he expected armed men to burst through at any moment. I was there that night, Naomi, October 15th, 2008. Your mother had discovered financial irregularities in the pharmaceutical company's government contracts. She found evidence that your father and his business partner, David Mitchell, were inflating prices on medical supplies sold to veterans' hospitals by enormous margins. I sat frozen in the leather chair, my military training telling me to assess threats and plan escape routes, while my heart screamed in denial of everything Harold was revealing. The date he mentioned, October 15th, was seared into my memory as the night that changed my life forever. I had been 16, studying for a chemistry test, when the phone call came about Mom's accident. Sarah came to the office that evening with a briefcase full of documents, financial records, purchasing orders, correspondence between your father and David Mitchell, discussing how to maximize profits from government contracts. She had spent months secretly copying everything, building an airtight case. Harold pulled out a manila envelope and spread photographs across his desk. They showed my mother in his office, her face serious and determined, as she pointed to financial documents. In one photo, she was placing papers into a briefcase. In another, she was writing something in a notebook. Your mother was not just Robert's wife. She had a degree in forensic accounting from Stanford University. Before she married your father, she worked for the Internal Revenue Service investigating tax fraud. She knew exactly what she was looking at when she discovered the pharmaceutical fraud. This revelation about Mom's professional background stunned me. Dad had always described her as a homemaker who occasionally volunteered for charitable organizations. He'd never mentioned her advanced education or her experience with financial investigations. Sarah planned to contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation the next morning. She had scheduled a meeting with Agent Patricia Wells, a federal investigator specializing in government contract fraud. But your father and David Mitchell discovered her plan. Harold opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small recording device, the kind used for taking depositions. Before Sarah left the office that night, she recorded a confession statement describing everything she had discovered and naming everyone involved in the conspiracy. She gave me this recording and asked me to deliver it to federal authorities if anything happened to her. He pressed play, and my mother's voice filled the room. After 16 years, hearing her speak felt like being struck by lightning. Her tone was calm but urgent, methodical in the way she laid out evidence of systematic fraud. My name is Sarah Elizabeth Brennan. If you are listening to this recording, it means that Robert Brennan and David Mitchell have either threatened me, or worse, to prevent me from exposing their criminal activities involving overcharging government medical facilities. I gasped. My mother's maiden name was Brennan. Harold was not just my father's attorney. He was my mother's brother, my uncle, who had changed his last name and infiltrated Dad's legal affairs to investigate the conspiracy that killed his sister. She knew they would try to stop her. Harold continued, his voice thick with emotion. The next morning, Sarah's car went off Highway 73 during a rainstorm. The police report said she lost control due to wet conditions and struck a guardrail. But the mechanic who examined the wreckage found that her brake lines had been severed. The official story I had lived with for 16 years crumbled in my mind. Dad had told me that Mom died trying to avoid hitting another car whose driver had lost control in the storm. He said she sacrificed herself to save a family with children. We even built a memorial garden in our backyard to honor her heroism. The mechanic who discovered the brake tampering was Douglas Mitchell David's younger brother. He was pressured to change his report and classify the death as accidental. A year later, Douglas was elected county sheriff, running on a platform funded entirely by the Mitchell family's pharmaceutical profits. Harold showed me the original mechanic's report with handwritten notes describing clear evidence of sabotage. Someone had deliberately cut through the brake lines in a way that would cause failure after several miles of driving. The killer had wanted the death to appear accidental, happening far from any witnesses who might have seen tampering. Your father and David Mitchell hired professional criminals to eliminate Sarah. The same men who tampered with her car have been used by the Mitchell family for other problems over the years. Witnesses who asked too many questions about government contracts, accountants who noticed billing irregularities, a journalist who was investigating pharmaceutical pricing fraud. I thought about all the times Dad had comforted me through my grief, helping me understand that Mom's death was a tragic accident. He had held me while I cried, attended therapy sessions with me, and built our entire family narrative around honoring Mom's memory through service to others. Every moment of his support had been contaminated by the knowledge that he had orchestrated her murder. Harold, why did you not expose this conspiracy 16 years ago? Why did you wait until now? His face twisted with anguish. Because they had you, Naomi. Your father made it clear that if I ever revealed the truth, you would suffer the same fate as your mother. I became his attorney to stay close enough to protect you and to gather evidence for eventual justice. But I was a coward. I should have taken you far away and gone to the authorities immediately. Harold walked back to the safe and pulled out one final item, a sealed envelope with my name written in my mother's handwriting. Sarah wrote this letter for you in case something happened to her. She wanted you to know the truth when you were old enough to protect yourself and seek justice. As I took the envelope, my hands shaking like Harold's had been, he delivered the final devastating revelation. Naomi, your father discovered yesterday that you have been unknowingly gathering evidence for a federal investigation. He believes you found your mother's original documents and have been working with the same FBI agent Sarah contacted 16 years ago. He has hired the same men who killed your mother to eliminate both of us today. They are positioned outside this building right now, waiting for his signal. Through the office window, I could see 3 unmarked vans parked across the street. Men in dark clothing sat inside, their attention focused on the law firm's entrance. My father, the man who had raised me and claimed to love me, had decided to murder me just as he had murdered my mother. The only question remaining was whether Harold and I could escape the trap before it closed around us. Harold moved to his desk and activated a computer monitor displaying security camera feeds from around the building. The images confirmed my worst fears. 3 vehicles containing a total of 9 armed men had positioned themselves to cover every exit from the law firm. Professional killers, just as Harold had described, wearing tactical gear and carrying weapons that looked military grade. They arrived 20 minutes before you did. Harold explained, his voice steadying as we faced immediate danger. Your father wanted to make sure we were both here before giving them permission to proceed. I studied the security feeds with the tactical assessment skills drilled into me through years of military training. The men had positioned themselves with clear lines of sight to the front entrance, rear exit, and emergency stairwell. However, they had made one critical error in their surveillance setup. Harold, these cameras show the building's perimeter. But what about underground access? Most downtown law firms in buildings this old have connecting tunnels or basement parking. His face lit up with the first hope I had seen since entering his office. Yes, this building connects to the Meridian office tower through an underground parking garage. The tunnel was built in 1962 during the Cold War as a fallout shelter connection. Harold quickly gathered all the evidence from his safe financial documents, proving the pharmaceutical fraud photographs of my mother's investigation recordings of confessions and my mother's sealed letter. He stuffed everything into a waterproof briefcase while I assessed our escape route options. "Do you have any weapons in this office?" I asked, switching into combat mode. "There is a pistol in my desk drawer, but I have never fired it. I am not a soldier, Naomi. I am a 67-year-old lawyer who has been living in fear for 16 years. I retrieved the weapon, a small .38 caliber revolver with 6 rounds, and checked its condition. Not ideal for fighting 9 professional killers, but better than facing them unarmed. "Harold, we need to move now. In military operations, the longer you stay in a compromised position, the more likely the enemy is to discover your escape plans." We moved toward the office's rear door, which led to a stairwell connecting to the basement level. Just as we reached the door, I heard the distinct sound of glass breaking from somewhere in the building's front lobby. The men outside had received their orders and were beginning their assault. "Harold, do you have a cell phone?" "Yes, but who can we call? The local police department is compromised because Sheriff Mitchell controls the investigation protocols for any incidents involving your father's business interests." I pulled out my military communication device, a secure phone issued to all personnel involved in sensitive operations. "I am calling my commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Wells. She has clearance to mobilize military police for federal investigations." Harold stopped moving and stared at me. Patricia Wells. The same agent Wells your mother was supposed to meet 16 years ago. The FBI agent Wells from 16 years ago is now Colonel Wells in military intelligence. She's been investigating pharmaceutical fraud involving government contracts for the past 3 years. As we descended the stairwell, I made the emergency call that would either save our lives or confirm that the corruption reached higher levels than we imagined. Colonel Wells answered on the first ring. "Naomi, what is your current status? You were supposed to report in 4 hours ago." "Colonel, I need immediate military police intervention. I am trapped in a civilian building with 9 armed hostiles attempting to eliminate myself and a key witness in the pharmaceutical fraud investigation." "Understood. What is your location?" I provided our coordinates while Harold led me through a maze of basement corridors that connected multiple downtown buildings. The underground area looked like it had been abandoned for decades, with flickering fluorescent lights and the musty smell of old concrete. Naomi military personnel are en route to your location. Can you reach a secure position within the next 15 minutes? Affirmative, Colonel. But there is something else you need to know. The witness with me has evidence that Sarah Brennan, the woman who was supposed to meet with you 16 years ago, was murdered to prevent her testimony. The same people who killed her are trying to kill us today. Silence stretched over the communication line for several seconds. When Colonel Wells responded, her voice carried a tone of grim satisfaction. Naomi, I have been waiting 16 years for this phone call. Get that witness and his evidence to the military base. We have been building a case against Brennan Mitchell Pharmaceuticals since 2008, when a woman named Sarah Brennan contacted us with allegations of systematic fraud involving government medical contracts. As Harold and I emerged from the underground tunnel system into the parking garage of the adjacent office building, I realized that my assignment to investigate pharmaceutical pricing had not been a coincidence. Colonel Wells had been orchestrating a complex operation to finish the investigation that my mother had started before her murder. Harold suddenly grabbed my arm and pulled me behind a concrete pillar. Naomi, look! Through the parking garage entrance, I could see one of the unmarked vans slowly cruising the street, searching for any sign of our escape. The killers had realized we were no longer in the law firm and were expanding their search pattern. Harold, do you have a vehicle here? My car is parked on level 3, but they might recognize it. I spotted a military-issued Humvee parked near the garage elevator, my own vehicle that I had driven to the law firm. The armored transport would provide protection against small arms fire and could outmaneuver civilian vehicles in an emergency. As we moved toward my vehicle, Harold stumbled and fell to the concrete floor. Blood was spreading across his white shirt from a wound in his shoulder that I had not noticed before. Harold, when did you get shot? When they broke the front windows. A bullet came through the office wall and hit me, but adrenaline masked the pain. I think I am losing too much blood to continue. I applied pressure to his wound using emergency medical techniques from my trauma training. The bullet had entered his shoulder but missed major arteries. He could survive if I got him to medical treatment within the next 30 minutes. Harold, I am getting you to the military base medical facility. Colonel Wells will protect both of us while we prepare to testify against everyone involved in this conspiracy. As I helped him into the Humvee, Harold made a revelation that changed my understanding of everything that had happened since my mother's death. Naomi, there is one more thing you need to know. I am not just your father's attorney or your mother's brother. After Sarah was murdered, I legally changed my name from Harold Winters to Harold Brennan, and spent the last 16 years infiltrating your father's organization. Everything I have done, every crime I have committed, every dollar I have stolen was part of a plan to gather enough evidence to destroy the conspiracy that killed my sister. The man I had thought was a corrupt lawyer stealing from my father's company was actually my Uncle Harold, who had spent 16 years undercover building a case for justice, while protecting me from the same fate that had claimed my mother. His theft of company funds had been a cover story to explain his access to financial records and his motivation for eventually betraying my father. As I drove toward the military base with Harold bleeding beside me and armed killers pursuing us through downtown traffic, I realized that my entire life had been shaped by forces I had never understood. But now, with evidence of conspiracy and murder with military support and federal resources, the time had come to fight back against the people who had destroyed my family and stolen 16 years of truth from my life. The battle for justice was just beginning, and I intended to win it in honor of my mother's memory and in defiance of everyone who thought they could silence the truth through violence and intimidation. The military base medical facility operated with the precision and efficiency that had defined my career in service. Within minutes of our arrival, Harold was in surgery while I sat in a secure briefing room surrounded by federal agents and military intelligence officers who had been waiting years for this moment. Colonel Patricia Wells looked exactly as I had imagined a career intelligence officer would, mid-50s silver hair pulled back in a regulation style, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of a situation before making decisions. She spread Harold's evidence across a conference table, while military technicians photographed and cataloged each document. Naomi. What I am about to tell you will probably come as a shock, but your assignment to investigate pharmaceutical pricing irregularities was never a routine nursing evaluation project. You have been working undercover for a joint military FBI task force targeting systematic fraud in government medical contracts. I stared at the colonel, trying to process the implications of what she was saying. Ma'am, are you telling me that my entire military career has been a cover story for an investigation I knew nothing about? Not your entire career. Your medical training, your nursing certification, your combat qualifications are all legitimate achievements that you earned through hard work and dedication. But for the past 8 months, your rotation assignments to different military hospitals were designed to give you access to billing records and supply chain documentation that we needed for our investigation. Colonel Wells activated a computer screen displaying organizational charts, financial records, and surveillance photographs. The scope of the investigation was far larger than I had imagined. Brennan Mitchell Pharmaceuticals has been systematically defrauding the government for 12 years, stealing an estimated $230 million from funds intended to provide medical care for veterans. Your father and David Mitchell created a network of shell companies, fake charities, and corrupt officials to hide their theft. She pointed to a photograph of David Mitchell, a man in his 60s with the cold eyes of someone accustomed to eliminating problems through violence. David Mitchell owns controlling interests in 17 pharmaceutical companies across 6 states. His network includes the county sheriff, who covered up your mother's murder, 3 state legislators who blocked investigations into pharmaceutical pricing, and 2 federal judges who dismissed fraud cases before they could reach trial. The revelation that the conspiracy extended into state and federal government explained why my father had felt secure enough to operate his criminal enterprise for so many years. He had not just been stealing money, he had been purchasing political protection through bribery and intimidation. Colonel Wells Harold told me that my mother contacted you 16 years ago with evidence of fraud. Why did you wait so long to act on her information? The colonel's expression darkened with what I recognized as professional frustration mixed with personal regret. Your mother's murder was investigated by corrupt local authorities who destroyed evidence and intimidated witnesses. By the time federal investigators realized what had happened, the conspiracy had covered its tracks and eliminated anyone who could provide testimony. We spent years building a new case from scratch, knowing that we would only get one opportunity to bring down the entire network. She showed me surveillance photographs taken over several years, my father meeting with David Mitchell in remote locations, money being transferred between shell companies, government officials receiving payments disguised as consulting fees. Your assignment to gather intelligence on pharmaceutical pricing gave us access to current financial records that we could not have obtained through traditional investigation methods. Military hospitals are required to maintain detailed purchasing records, but those records are classified and protected from civilian law enforcement requests. Colonel Wells opened a secure laptop computer and displayed financial spreadsheets showing millions of dollars in overcharges across dozens of military medical facilities. Your reports on pricing irregularities provided the documentation we needed to prove systematic fraud. Every time you filed a routine efficiency evaluation, noting that basic medical supplies were being billed at inflated prices, you were actually building a federal case against your father's criminal enterprise. The irony was overwhelming. My dedication to improving medical care for veterans had led me to unknowingly investigate and document my own father's crimes against those same veterans. Every report I had filed with the intention of helping wounded soldiers had actually been evidence in a conspiracy case. Ma'am, what happens now, Harold and I barely escaped with our lives, and there are still 9 armed men trying to eliminate us. Colonel Wells smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had been planning this moment for years. 20 minutes ago, federal agents simultaneously raided your father's residence, David Mitchell's office, the Brennan Mitchell Pharmaceuticals headquarters, and the homes of 12 co-conspirators across 3 states. Military police arrested your father at the airport where he was attempting to board a private jet to a country without extradition treaties. She showed me real-time surveillance footage from the raids, my father in handcuffs being led away from a small aircraft, David Mitchell's office being searched by agents wearing FBI tactical gear, computer servers being seized from the pharmaceutical company's main facility. David Mitchell attempted to destroy computer evidence by activating an electromagnetic device designed to wipe all electronic storage systems in his office. However, military cyber intelligence had already copied his entire network 3 days ago when we obtained warrants based on your investigative reports. The coordination and scale of the operation impressed me even by military standards. This was not a hasty response to an emergency situation. It was the culmination of years of careful planning and preparation. Sheriff Douglas Mitchell was arrested at his home this morning on charges of obstruction of justice accessory to murder and conspiracy to commit fraud. The state attorney general has appointed a special prosecutor to review every case the sheriff has handled over the past 16 years. Colonel Wells pulled out a final set of documents that made my heart race with anticipation. Naomi, the federal court has frozen all assets of Brennan Mitchell Pharmaceuticals pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. Your father's personal accounts, real estate holdings, and investment portfolios are now under government control. However, there is one complication regarding your inheritance. I had forgotten about the will that Harold had shown me, the document that had disinherited me in favor of charitable organizations. The will your father executed last week was signed under duress and coercion, making it legally invalid. According to his original estate planning documents, you remain the sole heir to his legitimate assets. The court will have to determine which portions of his wealth were derived from criminal activities and which portions represent lawful business profits. The possibility of inheriting millions of dollars felt surreal after everything that had happened. Money had never been my primary motivation for seeking justice, but the resources could be used to help other families who had been victimized by pharmaceutical fraud. Colonel Wells Harold told me that my mother contacted you 16 years ago using the name Sarah Brennan, but he is Harold Brennan, which means she was his sister. How long have you known about the family connection? The colonel's expression became somber as she prepared to reveal the final piece of the puzzle that had shaped my entire life. Naomi, your mother, Sarah, contacted me in September of 2008, 3 weeks before her murder. She told me that her brother Harold was a lawyer working for her husband's pharmaceutical company, and that Harold had discovered evidence of systematic fraud. She said Harold was afraid to come forward because he was afraid for his family's safety. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Harold had not spent 16 years infiltrating my father's organization after my mother's death. He had been working undercover before she was murdered, gathering evidence and feeding information to federal investigators. Your mother's plan was for Harold to continue working as your father's attorney while secretly documenting criminal activities. She would serve as the official whistleblower who contacted federal authorities, while Harold remained in position to gather additional evidence and protect you from retaliation. Colonel Wells showed me copies of emails and phone records documenting months of communication between my mother and federal investigators prior to her death. Sarah Brennan was not just a concerned citizen who discovered her husband's crimes. She was an active federal informant who'd been working with us for several months before she was murdered. Her death was not just the elimination of a witness, it was an assassination of a federal agent. The distinction elevated my mother's murder from a domestic crime to an act of terrorism against federal law enforcement. Everyone involved in the conspiracy would face additional charges for killing a person working on behalf of federal investigators. Naomi, there is one more thing you need to understand about your role in this investigation. You were not randomly selected for the undercover assignment to investigate pharmaceutical pricing. You were specifically chosen because you are Sarah Brennan's daughter, and we believed you would be motivated to seek justice for crimes committed against veterans." I finally understood why my military career had led me to this moment. Every assignment, every training program, every opportunity had been carefully orchestrated to prepare me for the mission of completing the investigation that my mother had started before her murder. The battle for justice was no longer just beginning. It was entering its final phase, and I was ready to see it through to the end. 3 months after the arrests, the federal courthouse in downtown Denver became the center of national attention as the largest pharmaceutical fraud trial in American history began. I sat in the witness section, wearing my dress military uniform, watching as my father and David Mitchell faced charges that could result in life sentences. The evidence that Harold and I had escaped with that terrifying day proved to be the foundation for convictions on multiple federal charges. My father received 25 years in prison for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and accessory to murder. David Mitchell was sentenced to life without parole for orchestrating my mother's assassination and ordering the attempted murder of Harold and myself. Sheriff Douglas Mitchell received 15 years for corruption and obstruction of justice in covering up the original murder investigation. The pharmaceutical company itself was dissolved by court order, with all assets liquidated to provide restitution to defrauded government medical facilities. The judge ordered that every veteran who had received substandard care due to inflated medical costs would receive compensation from the criminal proceeds. Harold, who had recovered completely from his gunshot wound, revealed his true identity in court testimony that brought tears to my eyes. My uncle, Harold Winters, had spent 16 years living under an assumed name, enduring the daily anguish of working for the man who killed his sister, all to protect me and gather evidence for the justice that finally arrived. Your Honor. Harold testified during the sentencing phase. I want the court to understand that every day I worked for Robert Brennan was torture. Every time he spoke about my sister Sarah, as if he loved her knowing that he had murdered her, I wanted to expose him immediately. But I also knew that Naomi's life depended on my ability to maintain my cover and gather evidence that would eventually bring down this entire conspiracy. The moment that gave me the greatest satisfaction came when Colonel Wells presented evidence that the investigation had prevented additional murders planned by the Mitchell organization. Federal surveillance had documented plans to eliminate 3 other whistleblowers who had been asking questions about pharmaceutical pricing irregularities at various government medical facilities. 6 months after the trial concluded, I made one of the most important decisions of my life. The court had determined that $47 million of my father's wealth represented legitimate business profits that were legally part of my inheritance. Rather than keeping money that had been earned through a company built on fraud and murder, I established the Sarah Winters Foundation for Veterans Medical Justice. The Foundation's mission focused on providing free legal representation for veterans' families who suspected medical billing fraud funding, independent audits of pharmaceutical pricing in government facilities, and supporting family members of federal whistleblowers who faced retaliation for reporting corruption. Harold agreed to serve as the Foundation's executive director, finally able to use his legal expertise for the cause that had motivated his 16 years of undercover work. Together, we opened offices in 12 states and hired attorneys who specialized in government contract fraud. The Foundation's first year exceeded every expectation I had for making a positive impact. We helped recover over $8 million in fraudulent overcharges for veteran medical care, provided legal assistance to 43 families facing retaliation for reporting pharmaceutical fraud, and established scholarship programs for children of federal whistleblowers. Harold and I also began the difficult but healing process of learning about my mother's life before her marriage to my father. He showed me photographs from their childhood, told me stories about her college years at Stanford University, and shared memories of the young woman who had dreamed of using her accounting skills to protect people from financial exploitation. Your mother always said that numbers could not lie. Harold explained as we sorted through boxes of her personal belongings that he had preserved for 16 years. She believed that somewhere in every financial fraud there would be a paper trail that honest investigators could follow to expose the truth. The most emotional moment of our reconciliation came when Harold presented me with something he had been saving for the day when justice was finally achieved: my mother's engagement ring, which she had removed and hidden before confronting my father about his crimes. Sarah took off her wedding ring before she came to my office that final night, Harold explained. She said that if Robert had truly loved her, he would not have built their marriage on money stolen from wounded veterans. But she wanted you to have her engagement ring because that represented the love and hope she felt when you were born. I wore my mother's ring when I graduated from advanced military investigative training 6 months later, having transferred permanently to the federal task force that investigates financial crimes against government medical programs. Colonel Wells promoted me to the rank of lieutenant and assigned me to lead investigations into pharmaceutical fraud affecting veterans' care. My new assignment felt like the completion of a circle that had begun with my mother's decision to expose corruption 16 years earlier. Every case I investigated, every fraudulent billing scheme I uncovered, every corrupt official I helped prosecute represented another step toward ensuring that no other family would suffer the loss and betrayal that had shaped my life. The most surprising development came 1 year after the trials when I received a phone call from a woman named Captain Jessica Bradford, a military prosecutor who had worked on the pharmaceutical fraud cases. She wanted to discuss a new investigation into medical device overcharging, but our professional relationship gradually evolved into something more personal. Jessica understood the demands of military service and the emotional challenges of seeking justice for crimes against veterans. Our first date was actually a working dinner where we reviewed evidence in a medical supply fraud case, but I found myself appreciating her intelligence, dedication, and sense of humor. Harold walked me down the aisle at my wedding 2 years later, wearing my mother's engagement ring as my wedding ring and carrying a bouquet that included flowers from the memorial garden my father had built as a monument to his own deception. During the ceremony, I read a passage from my mother's letter that had given me strength through the most difficult moments of seeking justice. My dearest Naomi, if you are reading this letter, it means that I did not live to see you grow into the remarkable woman I know you will become. But I want you to understand that the greatest inheritance I can leave you is not money or property, but the knowledge that truth and justice are worth fighting for, even when the cost seems too high to bear. The final twist in my story came during my wedding reception when Harold presented me with one last gift from my mother, a series of video recordings she had made for special occasions in my life, messages she had created, knowing she might not live to see my milestones. Sarah recorded these videos for your 18th birthday, your 21st birthday, your 25th birthday, your wedding day, and the birth of your first child, Harold explained. She wanted to be part of your life, even if she could not be physically present. That night, Jessica and I watched my mother's wedding day video together, and I finally understood that my true inheritance was not the $47 million that had been returned to me through the legal system. My real legacy was the courage, integrity, and compassion that my mother had demonstrated through her willingness to fight corruption even when she knew it might cost her life. 6 months after my wedding, I sat in the privacy of my home office preparing to watch the final video message my mother had recorded for me, the one intended for the birth of my first child. Jessica sat beside me, her hand resting on her growing belly where our daughter was developing, due to arrive in just 2 months. The video began with my mother sitting in the same chair where she had recorded all her previous messages, but this time she looked different. There was a glow about her, a sense of joy and anticipation that transcended the fear she must have felt about the dangerous investigation she was conducting. My precious Naomi, if you are watching this video, it means that you have found love, built a family, and are about to experience the incredible blessing of becoming a mother yourself. I want you to know how proud I am of the woman you have become, and how grateful I am that you have found happiness despite the challenges that life may have placed in your path." She paused, and I could see tears of joy in her eyes as she imagined the grandchild she would never meet. "I want to tell you about the name I always hoped you would choose if you had a daughter. When I was pregnant with you, I spent hours reading about names and their meanings, trying to find something that would represent strength, wisdom, and hope. If you decide to honor your heritage, I would love for you to consider the name Sarah Elizabeth, after your grandmother and myself." Jessica squeezed my hand, and I realized that we had independently chosen that exact name for our daughter, as if my mother's love had reached across time to guide our decision. But more important than any name is the example you set for your child. I hope that you will teach her that the greatest courage comes not from avoiding difficult situations, but from standing up for what is right, even when the personal cost seems unbearable. My mother's words resonated with everything I had learned through the investigation and prosecution of the conspiracy that had shaped my life. Justice had required sacrifice, courage had demanded persistence, and truth had emerged only through the willingness of many people to risk their safety for the sake of others. I also want you to know something about your father. The man you remember from your childhood before any of this corruption began was a good person who lost his way when faced with the temptation of easy money and the fear of losing his business. I do not excuse his choices, but I want you to understand that people are complex, and even those who commit terrible crimes were once capable of love and goodness. This perspective on my father surprised me. After everything he had done, I had come to see him as purely evil a man who had never truly loved anyone. But my mother's words reminded me of genuine moments from my childhood when he had shown kindness, patience, and affection that could not have been entirely fabricated. My final message for you is about forgiveness. I do not mean that you should excuse harmful actions or avoid seeking justice when crimes have been committed, but I do mean that you should not allow anger and bitterness to poison your own life and relationships. The people who try to hurt us win only if they succeed in making us into bitter, fearful versions of ourselves. The lesson about forgiveness would prove to be the most difficult part of my mother's wisdom to accept and implement. Even years later, I struggled with resentment toward my father and everyone who had participated in the conspiracy. But gradually, I began to understand that carrying hatred was like drinking poison and expecting someone else to suffer. Harold had already begun this process of healing through his decision to dedicate his remaining years to the Sarah Winters Foundation. Rather than retreating into retirement after 16 years of undercover work, he chose to transform his experience into a tool for helping other families seek justice. "I have one more gift for you," my mother continued in the video. "In the safe deposit box at First National Bank, you will find my personal journals from the years before you were born. I wrote about my dreams for your future, my hopes for the kind of person you would become, and my prayers that you would find purpose and meaning in your life." Jessica and I retrieved the journals the following week, and reading my mother's private thoughts about parenthood love and responsibility gave me a deeper understanding of the woman who had sacrificed her life to protect others from financial exploitation. One journal entry written when she was pregnant with me became my guiding philosophy for raising my own daughter. "I want to raise a child who understands that privilege comes with responsibility, that strength should be used to protect those who are vulnerable, and that the measure of a person's character is not what they achieve for themselves, but what they sacrifice for the benefit of others." 2 months later, Sarah Elizabeth was born at the military base hospital, where I had received treatment after escaping the assassination attempt. Harold held his great niece for the first time, while tears of joy and healing streamed down his face. "She has your mother's eyes," he whispered, and I could see the family resemblance that connected 3 generations of women who had each faced challenges that required courage and determination. The Sarah Winters Foundation continued to grow and expand its impact on veterans' families affected by medical fraud. By our daughter's first birthday, we had helped recover over $25 million in fraudulent overcharges, provided legal assistance to more than 200 families, and successfully prosecuted pharmaceutical executives in 6 states. I returned to active duty 6 months after Sarah Elizabeth's birth, but my role had evolved from undercover investigator to supervisory special agent responsible for training other military personnel in financial fraud detection. Every new investigator I trained learned about the importance of persistence, courage, and attention to detail through the story of how one nurse's routine efficiency reports had brought down a multi-state criminal conspiracy. The most meaningful recognition came 3 years after the trials, when the Veterans Administration established the Sarah Brennan Award for Excellence in Medical Fraud Investigation. The annual award honors federal employees who demonstrate exceptional dedication to protecting veterans from financial exploitation in medical care. Harold and I accepted the first award on behalf of my mother, and I used the ceremony to announce the expansion of the Sarah Winters Foundation into a national organization with offices in all 50 states. My mother believed that justice is not a destination you reach, but a direction you choose to travel every day, I said in my acceptance speech. Every veteran who receives proper medical care because we exposed pharmaceutical fraud, every family who finds legal help when they face retaliation for reporting corruption, every child who receives a scholarship because their parent had the courage to be a whistleblower represents another step toward the kind of world my mother envisioned. As I looked out at the audience of veterans, military personnel, federal investigators, and family members of whistleblowers, I realized that my mother's death had not been in vain if it led to systematic changes that protected others from similar exploitation. The Foundation's work gave meaning to our family's sacrifice and transformed a story of murder and betrayal into a legacy of justice and protection for those who serve our country. Harold often said that Sarah would be proud to know that her courage had inspired a movement that helped thousands of families over the years that followed her death. 5 years after my wedding, Jessica and I welcomed our son, Robert Harold, named after the grandfather he would never meet, and the uncle who had protected our family through 16 years of danger and uncertainty. Harold, now in his 70s, but still energetic and determined, became the kind of grandfather to both children that my father never had the chance to be. On quiet evenings when Sarah Elizabeth asked about her grandmother, I would tell her stories about a woman who chose to fight corruption even when she knew it might cost her life, who recorded video messages for grandchildren she would never meet, and who believed that the greatest gift parents can give their children is the example of standing up for what is right. The hardest question Sarah Elizabeth asked came on her 5th birthday. "Mommy, why did Grandpa Robert do bad things if he loved you?" I thought about my mother's words about complexity and forgiveness before answering, "Sometimes people make terrible choices when they are scared or greedy or confused about what is really important in life. Grandpa Robert forgot that love means protecting people, not hurting them. But the important thing for you to remember is that you get to choose what kind of person you want to be, and you can learn from other people's mistakes without repeating them." As I tucked Sarah Elizabeth into bed that night, I realized that my mother's greatest legacy was not the foundation that bore her name or the award that honored her courage. Her true inheritance was the wisdom she had passed down about the importance of choosing love over fear, justice over convenience, and truth over comfortable lies. The circle of healing was complete, but the work of justice continued every day through the Foundation, through my investigations, and through the example I hoped to set for my children about the kind of person their grandmother had been and the kind of people they could choose to become. I want to ask you something that I think about often as I raise my own children. How do you teach young people to have the courage to do what is right, when doing what is right requires personal sacrifice? Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between what was safe and what was just? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story inspired you to think about the importance of speaking up against corruption and injustice, please like this video, subscribe to hear more stories about ordinary people who find extraordinary courage, and share this with anyone who might need to be reminded that justice is worth fighting for. Thank you for listening to my family's story, and I hope that it encourages you to never give up on seeking truth and protecting those who cannot protect themselves.